Hi everyone, this is Auntie Jenna. We're going to listen to a Jewish story today. Today I'm going to tell you one of my favorites. I really like it and I hope you do too. Thanks for listening. Today's story is called The Humble Man's Reward.
Hey up, let's go fast. There's a deer running past. Gallop and catch up to him so we can aim and shoot at him.
The king and his royal advisors were hunting in the forest. They rode on strong horses and hunted animals. They galloped along the winding forest paths between the tall trees and thick bushes. Suddenly, they found themselves in the middle of a small clearing. Sparkling blue water flowed through the green grass, and luxurious vegetation grew. Amazingly sweet melodies filled the air.
Where are those tunes coming from?
The king and his advisors wondered. They followed the sound of the music. There, before their eyes, was a shepherd sitting on a rock, his knapsack at his feet. He was playing a flute while a flock of sheep grazed around him. Ah, what a lovely sight and what sweet music! The king went closer to the shepherd and began a conversation with him. The shepherd answered all the king's questions, showing great wisdom and cleverness. The king was amazed at the shepherd's understanding and decided to take him back to the palace. Many years passed. During this time, the king taught the shepherd all the royal ceremonies and palace etiquette. The youth learned his lessons quickly and well. He found favor in the eyes of the king, who raised him up stage by stage until he was appointed to the highest office in the land, Minister of the King's Treasury. The Minister of the Treasury was very kind. He treated the citizens well, and they all loved and admired him greatly. The king also loved the wise and clever minister. He often consulted with him on matters of state and always found him a big help. The only people who didn't like the minister of the treasury were the other ministers. They were jealous. They hadn't been given such a high post, while this simple shepherd, who didn't even know how to act in the king's palace, was made minister of the treasury. Worse, when the king needed advice, he asked the minister of the treasury and not them. The other ministers were very jealous. The jealousy that burned in their hearts grew stronger from day to day. They spread rumors about the minister of the treasury and demanded that the king remove him from his post and appoint a different minister instead. But the king didn't listen to them. He loved the minister of the treasury and knew that the rumors were lies. One day, the ministers came to the king with a new rumor about the minister of the treasury.
Your Majesty the King,
They cried.
the Minister of Finance to you tells lies. From the king's treasury he steals night and day to furnish his house without having to pay. He has couches and rugs, all expensive and rare, drapes out of silk and other fine fare. How can a shepherd who was once so poor furnish his home with such luxury and more? The people's tax money he stole from the king, so to you, your majesty, this news we bring.
Though the king did not believe what the ministers said, he had no choice but to call for a meeting of all the ministers, including the Minister of Finance, to find out the truth.
Minister of the Treasury, do you have anything to say in your defense?
Asked the king when all the ministers had said their piece. The minister of the treasury stood up and said,
Your Majesty the King, no crime did I do, and if you so wish, I can prove it to you. Though my enemies say I committed a crime, my hands never touched what wasn't mine. He's lying,
shouted the other ministers.
Let's all go to his house,
one of them said,
and see the expensive furnishings in it.
The other ministers agreed, and off they went, the king and the other ministers, to the minister of the treasury's house. When they arrived at the house, the ministers rubbed their eyes in amazement. Was it possible? The house was furnished with simple furnishings. There were no plush sofas, no expensive carpets, no gold and silver dishes. It was a simple home, not at all like the home of such an important minister. The king and his ministers went from room to room. They were very surprised at the simple furnishings they saw. Then they came to a closed door. They wanted to open it and go into the room, but the minister of the treasury begged them not to.
"This room,"
he said,
"is my private room. Even members of my household don't go into it."
When he said that, the other ministers became very suspicious.
"This is probably where he hides the stolen money,"
they said to the king. The king ordered the door to the room opened. When the king and the ministers entered the room, they could not believe their eyes. The room was empty. There was not a single piece of furniture in it, no table, not a single chair, not even a bed. There were no carpets on the floor and no pictures hanging on the walls. On the floor in one corner of the room were a stick, a knapsack, and a shepherd's flute.
"What is the meaning of this?"
the king asked the minister of the treasury.
"What is this room used for?"
The minister of the treasury was embarrassed to tell everyone what he did in that room, but he knew he had to answer the king's question.
"Your Majesty,"
the former shepherd said,
"from the day you took me from the fields, I have always tried not to become proud of my high position and my closeness to the king. Every day I come into this room, take the shepherd's staff in my hand, put the knapsack on my back, and play the shepherd's tunes on the flute. I do that so that I will always remember where I came from, so that I will never grow proud. I know,"
the minister of the treasury continued,
"that it is not my talents or honesty that made me find favor in the king's eyes, but only that Hashem, God's kindness and mercy, was on me. They are what turned me from a simple shepherd to the minister of the treasury."
The king was very moved by what the minister of the treasury said, and by his great humility. Here was someone who could have become proud, but instead stayed humble, living in a simply furnished home, and even making sure to remind himself of his humble origins. The king was impressed that his treasury minister gave all the credit to Hashem, to God. The king was so moved that he hugged the minister of the treasury and kissed him warmly. The other ministers shook the treasury minister's hand and asked his forgiveness for making up false rumors about him. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Auntie Jenna's story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Check out our other stories, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.